Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. Today we'll be talking with author Jesselyn Cook about her new book, The Quiet Damage, QAnon and the Destruction of the American Family. We'll chat with Jesselyn in just a second, but first, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and/or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please follow or subscribe and rate and review, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So, Jesselyn Cook, she's an award-winning investigative reporter and journalism lecturer who has written extensively about online conspiracy theories and their offline harms. Prior to covering the tech beat at NBC News, she was a senior reporter on HuffPost's National Enterprise Desk. Jesselyn, welcome into the back room.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, congratulations first on the recent release of your book, which is called The Quiet Damage, QAnon and the Destruction of the American Family. How and when did this particular phenomenon, if we want to call it, when did that start to become a real problem in America?
Well, QAnon has been around since 2017, but America has a long history of mass delusions, of conspiracy theory culture. I think we really saw it kind of explode to a level that we can't ignore with social media. It's so difficult now for us all to have a shared reality because we're all traversing different versions of it online. Mm-hmm. People are being pulled into echo chambers, rabbit holes. And so things have been not great for a while, to put it lightly. But obviously over the pandemic, we felt a big shift. It felt like kind of everyone knew someone who was latching on to kind of delusional conspiracy theories that not so long ago would have seemed outlandish and now have been really normalized and mainstreamed. And so it's been a long road here, but I think some of that normalization of conspiracy theories has outlasted the pandemic, has outlasted Donald Trump, even though a lot of people like to point to him as really making mainstream conspiracy theories and misinformation go so viral. But it's been an ebbing and flowing journey here. And now QAnon has really seeped into our culture in insidious ways that even if we can't hear the name QAnon as much, if it's a little less perceptible, it's just really blended in.
And one of the things that has always been confusing about it to me is like if you see a Trump rally and the people, whether it's a Jordan Klepper or somebody will interview people online, and there'll always be people that either have shirts or signs about QAnon or Q, and they'll say, oh, Q, he's so smart. Like they refer to Q as if it's a person. Is there a Q? Is there like some wizard behind a curtain named Q that these people are getting? I've never gone into like the deep recesses of the internet, 4chan, all that stuff. But like, if you do, and if you've gone into those places, are they referring to Q as a person who is the leader of QAnon? Is that how it's structured to them?
Well, first of all, good for you. I would definitely not recommend spending a lot of time in these weird spaces. I have for my reporting. But, Q, the idea is that there is this shadowy, anonymous figure known only as Q, who is a government insider working with Trump to bring down the so-called deep state. And so Q would post these little tidbits of intel called Q drops on places like 4chan, 8chan, later 8kun. And so the person or people behind Q, or if we can kind of call it the account of Q, I think has changed hands a bit in the early aughts of QAnon. The documentary on HBO about QAnon, Q Into the Storm, really laid out compelling evidence that the person behind Q, at least toward the end of it, where QAnon's not gone, but Q has been dormant for a while, was a man named Ron Watkins in the Philippines. He and his dad were kind of, it seemed like a bit of a LARP, they were just trolling their QAnon believers and QAnon followers. But QAnon believers notoriously generally won't accept evidence. You can show them facts and you can show them indisputable truths, and they will turn away from that. So even though this documentary did lay out kind of at least one or two people to really point to and kind of showed that they were just messing with people, a lot of QAnon believers still don't believe that. They believe even Donald Trump might be Q. They sometimes call it Q+. They believe Donald Trump has been kind of doing this solo the whole time. So I don't have a solid answer for you, but yes, there was someone or some people behind Q, the account online, for quite a while.
But you say that's been a little dormant for a while. How do they explain that? Like, if this almighty leader, where is he? Like, why is it quiet? Where did he go?
Well, there are a lot of different ways that when Q would lay out dates, like, oh, the deep state elites are supposed to be hauled off to Gitmo on this date, and then it wouldn't happen, or when Q goes dark, they find different ways to kind of do mental gymnastics and justifications to explain what's going on. Maybe Donald Trump is Q and he's just too busy doing these secret behind the scenes.
Right. So there's always an answer for everything.
There's always an answer for everything. Even if Q gets caught in a lie, they'll say, well, disinformation is a tactic that Q uses. He has to throw the deep state off the trail. That's why he lied, because he knew the deep state was watching this intel. And so, there's always something.
Mm-hmm. Well, this begs a lot of other questions, which I want to ask you soon about the mindset of these people. But I first want to understand, when did you first get real life, in-person exposure to QAnon and the QAnon followers?
I had been reporting on Q and kind of following its online rise from, I think, 2018. It emerged in 2017. I was aware of it as of that time and started reporting a little bit in 2018, 2019. And it was becoming very alarming to me seeing these very fringe conspiracy theories bubble their way up from QAnon into the mainstream, hearing like GOP members, even Donald Trump, kind of iterate some of this stuff. But it was in 2020, August of 2020, I had just moved to LA and I heard that there was a QAnon rally in West Hollywood. And so I went, not expecting many people to show up because Q at the time, again, was still thought of as this fringe movement entirely online. There were not a lot of people who wanted to associate their faces with QAnon, or so I thought. Because when I got there were 1,000 people marching down Hollywood Boulevard. It was one of the craziest moments of my life. Just, even pulling up in the cab that I was in, you could hear these chants of pedo gate, and we're like, where we go one, we go all, and like kill all pedophiles. And the cab driver is kind of looking at me in the rearview mirror like, what the hell are you going to? And then to kind of like turn around this corner and see everyone and all these signs and all this, I don't know, just these people with such real conviction on their faces. They really felt like they were there standing up for what was right. They were there for a cause they believed in. And I spent hours that day talking to different folks about what had brought them out. I talked to a practicing family therapist in LA she had literally taped a pizza box to her chest and it said, Pizzagate is real. And she would kind of go back and forth between telling me about Pizzagate and telling me about these clients she had. And it was just like, that was a real splash of water in my face, because it felt like I had walked into a real life QAnon forum online, and here were all these people ready to show their beliefs and stand for them. And this was just in LA, that was my first exposure to it in real life. And that was really the turning point, I think, around the world, where we really started seeing these kind of conspiracy theories just blow up.
So you mentioned something, which I want to see if we can get the definitive answer to this burning question, which is, in researching the book, in your travels, in the years you've been following, did you ever find any actual pizza places in Washington, D.C., or elsewhere, where Democrats, led by Hillary Clinton and shadow President JFK Jr., gathered to drink the blood of babies and operate their sex trafficking business? Does this ever exist anywhere?
No, I did not ever find that, although I met many, many people who told me that I was just turning my face away from the truth and I wasn't looking hard enough. And,
how do these people square these beliefs and this presumption that people like you and me, that we're the deaf, dumb, and blind ones, yet they are rabidly supporting an adjudicated rapist, an admitted grabber of women's private parts, somebody who is admitted to walking in on underage models at his beauty pageants and commenting on their breasts? Like, how do they square that reality?
So there's a term coined by a journalist named David Roberts called tribal epistemology. And in a nutshell, it just means when people become part of a tribe, like a Donald Trump supporter, they become part of a community that almost kind of reaches like a cult-like level. their ideology becomes part of their identity, and their commitment to the tribe becomes more important than their commitment to the truth. So whatever the tribe says goes. Evidence doesn't matter. Facts don't matter. Dissent, they won't hear it. You're either with us or against us. And it really warps and distorts their perception of the world around them. And so if you were to bring someone like this, counter evidence, something that shows their views are false, they won't just turn away from it. They'll view you as an enemy. They will view you as a threat to what they stand for and who they are. And so that has really sunk in deep for a lot of these people. And while they do like to call themselves truth seekers a lot of the time, what I found in my reporting, I profiled 5 families in my book, 5 QAnon believers, but I interviewed hundreds. And so often it's not really the truth that they're after. There's something else that's drawing them into conspiracy theories. Something about latching onto these beliefs wholeheartedly makes them feel good. It fulfills an unmet need. It gives them, in a lot of cases, a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, in some cases, hope and agency. And that becomes more precious to them and more powerful and more all-encompassing than any devotion to the truth. And so they will just turn away from anything that threatens their kind of delusion.
But it's that feeling good part that just seems weird, because the people that you've profiled, I mean, they range from a liberal lawyer to a woman who used to be a Bernie Sanders supporter, which I want to ask you about in a second, because that whole thing is crazy to me. But these are not dumb people. And so you would then think that there's some kind of kindness or decency to them on some level. How do they then feel good by making wild accusations against innocent people? I mean, the most horrible accusations you can make: groomers, pedophiles. Worst thing you could say about anyone on this planet is that they molest children. How does that make a liberal lawyer or a Bernie Sanders supporter feel good? Help me understand.
So I think in some ways, conspiracy theory devotion fulfills a lot of the same psychological needs that legitimate forms of activism does. So like for Black Lives Matter supporters or for environmental ralliers, people who stand up for legitimate evils and they stand up against oppression. And, they do that because they're serving a higher purpose. And that does make them feel good. That does give them a sense of purpose. It for some people, it gets them out of bed every day. And so for these QAnon believers, I know it's hard to wrap your mind around it. And it's a gradual process to get to these extreme beliefs. I think of it kind of like the proverbial frog that unwittingly boils very slowly. But once they get there, it really makes them feel like they're standing up for what's right. And to give you an example from the book, a quick one, one woman I profiled, she was a Democrat. She had voted for Hillary Clinton. She's quite elderly. And over time, the things that made her feel good in life started to fade away. She retired. She had a very proud career, but she retired. She lost her mobility, so she wasn't able to see her friends as much. She was just stuck at home. Women, I think a lot of our perceived societal value is associated with our appearance. It's unfortunate, but it's true. And so her looks had faded. Her life had changed in ways that were beyond her control, and she was just spending a lot of time at home. And the things that made her feel good, the purpose and the meaning she derived from her career was gone. And after this pretty traumatic cancer misdiagnosis, she had a real anger at the medical system, which led her into wellness communities on Facebook and the algorithms that kind of nudged her along to QAnon. And suddenly it didn't matter that she was, for lack of a better word, like an old lady at home. She got to be part of this movement that was bigger than herself. She got to show up online every single day. She got to rage against Bill Gates, trying to supposedly kill us all with vaccines. And the community that she was part of online, it accepted her wholeheartedly. There's no barrier to entry and retirement. Anyone can be part of it. And every post she would make on Facebook, she would be celebrated for that in her online networks. And that it gave her back some of that purpose and value she lost. And so she's not a dumb woman. She's not a bad person. She is very passionate. And I think even if there's a voice in her head that knows none of this is true, that is overpowered by her desire to just feel good about herself again. And so it's just one example. I chart many different paths into this stuff, but It's not that people's critical thinking skills go out the window. They're just overpowered by human needs, and they are needs. We do need to feel purpose. We do need to feel belonging, and we don't necessarily need to stand up for what's true.
Someone like me and a lot of other people like me have said, okay, they're brainwashed and they're in a cult. Is that how you see it?
It is similar to brainwashing in some ways, and certainly similar to the needs that a cult fulfills. Something like QAnon can as well. A cult, I think of as having one dominant leader who's doing the brainwashing, and QAnon, even as Q is dormant, as we said, QAnon is still drawing people in. So I wouldn't quite call it a cult, but it does kind of change your thinking patterns, and it's not a hobby, it's an obsession. People don't kind of dip their toe into QAnon. They isolate themselves from their families. Yeah, they throw away their life savings. One man in my book does just that. He's kind of grifted into buying up all these silver and gold coins because QAnon influencers convince him that our financial system is going to be wiped out and he'll need stuff to barter with. So it's, it completely takes over people's lives because they think they're doing what's right. They think that they're helping to bring about the so-called Great Awakening, which in QAnon is this fantastical idea that all of the bad people, the deep state elites, are going to be eradicated and prosperity will be granted to all. And so that is something worth devoting your life to if you think it's true.
Yeah, I get that. And I get that because it took me a while to flip with regard to January 6th. When it first happened, and for a while after that, I was like, wow, these people, they're just thugs and criminals. And then it made sense to me that day they thought they were the patriots, that they were really protecting America from democracy, not trampling on the democracy. And they were going to do that no matter how or what it took to do. Doesn't make it right. But just for me in my own head, I was like, now I get it. So then you start to blame Trump and all of his minions who continue spreading the big lie, and people get brainwashed and they're in a cult, I don't know. It's a very scary thing. I mean, your book focuses on 5 families in terms of the collateral damage to spouses, to children, to siblings. What were your biggest takeaways there? Like the people who are in it, that's one thing. How does it impact everybody around them?
It's devastating. I mean, think about the person you love most, someone who you maybe know to be good and decent and smart and you respect and you lean on them. And then imagine watching that person just transform into a stranger, someone who is hostile, who is delusional, who in many cases is cruel. We talked about how people's beliefs in this context really become part of their identity. And if you try to challenge those beliefs, it feels like an attack, not just on their ideas, but on who they are. And so they can become vicious. And I talked to so many family members who would describe their own children, their parents, calling them atrocious names. One mother in my book tells her son to literally shed her DNA. She disowns him. And in this character, he had lost his father to suicide, and then he lost his mother to QAnon. And she said in some ways, the latter was more painful because it felt like she was choosing to QAnon over her flesh and blood. It felt like he was trying to mourn someone who was still alive and who was someone she still kind of spams him with these wild YouTube videos from time to time. And he's trying to move on from her because it's just too painful to have her in his life anymore. And so I think that pain that family members are experiencing, there's not a lot of attention paid to it, partly because there's so much stigma. It's hard to even say to a friend, like, if someone asks you how you're doing, it's hard to say, I've been better. My mom, she thinks Hillary Clinton needs babies. It's so outlandish. I think a lot of these people are really suffering in silence. There is a community on Reddit, QAnon casualties, where these people will come together and commiserate. But it's kind of like a grieving process that I would say is incomparable to any other, because again, you're not just losing someone, you're watching them become almost something grotesque in some cases, something that you can't possibly wrap your mind around. And so it's so many interviews I've done, people have described to me as like the worst pain of their life is just watching the people they love disappear.
Yeah. Look, I, like a lot of people, I lost my late mother to Fox News in that whole thing. I mean, it's a real phenomenon in this country. People get old and they sit around at home by themselves. They get sucked into that extremist right-wing ecosystem. And so I understand that. It just, it is sad. So let's talk about Alice for a second. She's the former Bernie Sanders supporter. Help us understand how someone can go from save the planet progressive ideology to flat earth conspiracy. Like, it's two ends of the spectrum. How does that work?
So Alice, so she lives out in California, and she has always been in this very progressive bubble, Bernie Sanders supporter. All her friends were Bernie Sanders supporters. And Bernie, to her, was, he gave her hope. He gave her hope for a better world. She wanted her son to grow up in a world where Bernie Sanders was going to take down this corporate profit structure, going to eradicate, our profits over people governance model. He was going to save the planet. He was going to do all these amazing things. And when he lost, she lost her hope. And she felt that the DNC had stolen it from him. And there was a lot of feelings of betrayal there. And QAnon, in a weird way, gave her hope back to her. I think when you're in QAnon, you're kind of seeing the world through a binary. There's good and there's evil. And she really, the good, the delusional good, I suppose, and QAnon was like, she had her blinders on that. So QAnon promises a better world. It talks about, there is some similar messaging to what Bernie was saying. And I know that that's maybe hard to even understand.
I'm sure he would disagree with that.
But I think he would.
Proceed.
The idea, and Bernie talks about a lot about corruption and about these relationships between, like our elected leaders and these powerful corporations. QAnon does too. And a lot of conspiracy theories obviously have a nugget of truth. And so I would say the truth is the stuff that Bernie would speak and preach, and that resonated deeply with Alice. And then QAnon would completely distort that and take it to a whole other level. It's not just corrupt politicians. It's like baby-eating politicians who are deeply corrupt and who are keeping us sick and poor and poisoning our planet with chemtrails. And so QAnon promised her the Great Awakening, which, again, was this utopic future where we're not going to have a climate change crisis because we're going to take down Monsanto. We're going to take down like all these evil corporations that are making our planet sicker and sicker. And we're not going to have poverty because we're going to take down these evil bankster elites who are keeping people in poverty. And so QAnon, Alice was very outcome focused. She is driven by hope. She's an incredibly anxious person. And when you kind of give her a promise of a better world, that is something she dives in headfirst to. And so
the part that I can't square is, then how does she support someone like Donald Trump, who is a convicted felon, who is a thief, who is a fraudster, who is supposedly everything that you just said she's not looking for and trying to run away from? It just doesn't make... It would be one thing if someone said, I'm a QAnoner, but I'm not voting for Trump. Then I'd be like, okay, tell me more about this QAnon thing. But the minute you go from, I want the world to be free of corporate greed and corruption, and that's why I'm voting for Trump, I don't understand how do you get from point A to point B in that equation.
And so it is, it's hard to sum it up in a few minutes, but so her pathway in was through a piece of QAnon propaganda, a video series called The Fall of the Cabal. It's a 10-part series. I should also mention, she got into QAnon over the pandemic, the early stages of the pandemic. So she was in this kind of freaked out state of panic. She has elderly relatives. She thought they were going to die. She wasn't in the best frame of mind, but anyway, she watches this series, The Fall of the Cabal, and it starts out kind of painting some inconsistencies or supposed inconsistencies between our official narrative and what's really going on. But then it gets straight to the heart of the Donald Trump thing. And it speaks in language that's kind of like, I praise you for watching this video if it's outside of your ideological comfort zone. And it makes the viewers feel like, they're doing the right thing and they're challenging their belief systems. But it says, Donald Trump, I know if you're watching this video, you probably think he's this horrible man. But what you need to understand is that the media has been lying to you. The media never covers his triumphs. They only exaggerate his stumbles, and they twist and distort. And then what really spoke to Alice was they talked about how Donald Trump had put, I believe it was $15 million, $50 million into cleaning up the oceans. And Alice is watching this and she's like, there's no way. Like she's got this very deep environmentalist heart. And she's like, I would have heard about something like that. There's no way. So she pauses this video. She goes to Google it. And sure enough, it's true. He did do this. And she's like, well, why didn't the media cover that? Why didn't I hear about that? Like, this is something amazing. And I didn't know Donald Trump did it. And, there was media coverage. She just hadn't seen it. But in that moment, all the messaging she'd been hearing in this video series about how the media suppresses all the good stuff Trump does, that kind of clicked. And, Bernie had spoken previously about how, I think it was the Bezos-owned Washington Post had kind of obscured coverage of him before. And so all these little pieces were starting to click for her. And it may not work on every person. It obviously doesn't happen to every person who watches this video series. But in her state of panic, with all these little building blocks of well, if this one thing is true, maybe this slightly crazier thing is true.
And then the trials are rigged, and everybody's against him, and the judges are corrupt, and all that, and boom, now you're like, he's an innocent guy, and he's a good guy. I get it, right? I guess it's kind of simplistic when you really think about it. It's just you believe the reality that you want to believe, based on what you're able to see, and they're swimming in this online sea of disinformation and propaganda, and getting it from him and from all sides. Which, to your point earlier about the social media and online websites, it seems out of control. So how do we reach these people? How do we unradicalize them? If they're in a cult, how do we deprogram them? How do we get America back to a place where we can just piss each other off by arguing about deregulation and taxes instead of JFK Jr. is really the president and Joe Biden's in Gitmo?
Wouldn't that be nice? So I think a lot of people who have lost loved ones to something like QAnon, they see their uncle or their sister spewing nonsense, spewing fiction. And so they bring them facts. And that logically makes sense. I'm going to cure their delusion by bringing them the truth. And that is not an effective approach to take because, again, these people are not really after the truth, no matter how much they claim they are. And so the first step to trying to get someone out is trying to understand why they got in. And that's not always easy to do. You kind of have to get into therapist mode a little bit and try to see what is it that QAnon is doing for them. Is it giving them a sense of purpose, like the elderly woman I had mentioned? Is it giving them a sense of belonging? A lot of very isolated people find their way into QAnon because it is a very welcoming crowd for the believers. If you're not a believer, not so much. But once you can really pinpoint, here it is, here is what QAnon is making them feel, or whatever conspiracy theory movement it is, that's where you need to start. And so if it is a sense of purpose, rather than trying to shake them out of their delusions, try to help them find purpose outside of the movement in a healthy, productive way. One man I profile in the book, his path out of QAnon, again, it's not that he's forced to reckon with reality. It's he rediscovers his sense of purpose in being a parent and a partner. And so that for him, it's a difficult journey and, very painful. There's a suicide attempt in the middle. It's quite a challenging journey to get there. But once he's able to recover that sense of purpose, that's when these delusions start to fall away because he just doesn't need them anymore. He's able to feel good without these, conspiracy theories are essentially a crutch for a lot of people. And so we need to find them help in other ways. And it's easier said than done, especially when the person you love is just, maybe they're not only latching on to delusional things, they're latching on to hateful things. There's a lot of anti-Semitism in QAnon. There's a lot of other worse stuff in there, or not worse, but equally bad. A lot of really horrendous, hateful ideas. And so sometimes walking away for loved ones is the right path for them. Certainly that's what we see in some cases in the book. But it's just trying to fact check someone out of beliefs that have become stitched into their identity is so rarely ever going to work.
Yeah. I mean, it makes total sense what you're saying. Easier said than done, but I hope we'll be able to get there. someday soon. The book is, again, called The Quiet Damage, QAnon and the Destruction of the American Family. It's out now. You can get it everywhere you buy books. Jesselyn, thank you so much for coming on. This was a really insightful, fascinating window into a kind of crazy world. And hope we'll get a chance to chat again sometime.
Thanks so much for having me.
All righty. Take care. This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Matty Rosenberg and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Lengyel. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.